All right, so far we've done sine and cosine, and they're very, very similar. Tangent is kind of a creature of its own design here. So let's start in on the tangent graph. So firstly, we're going to start in on our unit circle like we did for sine and cosine. Tangent at 0, so remember that's sine 0 over cosine 0, is 0. Tangent at pi over 2, that's sine over cosine, which turns out to be undefined. At 180, it's back to 0. At 270, it's back to undefined. And at 360, it is back to 0. All right, so you can already tell that this is kind of a weird graph because of those undefineds. All right, so when we write in our zeros, positives, and negatives, 0 is certainly easy. Undefined is certainly easy. Now, for tangent, technically, we should be graphing extra ones to kind of get the shape of it, but I'm going to just write these in. 0, and then between the 0 and the first undefined is positive. I know that doesn't look like it says positive. Between the undefined and the 0, it goes negative, positive, and then negative. And I promise that is what you get when you start looking at those other tangent functions on the unit circle. We just didn't need to find all of them. All right. So down here we've got our graph. Yours is labeled. And so let's start graphing this up. So first off, 0, undefined, is a straight vertical line up and down. And hopefully that looks a bit familiar for you. We're back to 0, undefined, back to 0. Now the positives and negatives happen halfway in between, and it kind of works like our amplitude. So the negative is really at -1, the positive is really at +1. I always finish this off by drawing that last one, even though I know it's technically outside of the 2 pi. All right, now here's the shape of tangent. It comes down through one side, swoops through these 3 dots, and then goes back up the other side. So swoops up, and swoops down, swoops up, and swoops down. I told you it was very different. This one doesn't look like a circle pulled apart at all. All right. So for tangent, we don't really have minimums and maximums anymore, right? Because it's pointing up and it's pointing down for every single one. However, we do have the vertical asymptotes, all right? We did these before. These are a dotted vertical line. And these are at the undefined points. All right, anytime in tangent when we got undefined, for example, at pi over 2, that was a vertical asymptote. An undefined at 3 pi over 2, that's a vertical asymptote. All right, for tangent, these happen at pi over 2 and at 3 pi over 2. And then we also have our midline, and the midline is exactly what it was for sine and cosine. This is the horizontal middle. All right, so that's where this 0 line takes place down the center. All right, now similarities with sine and cosine and where to find things, namely that A still tells you your amplitude. It still tells you how far up, above, and below the midline are your high points and your low points. B still tells you the midline. And in this case, tangent tells you 0, positive, undefined, -0, positive, undefined, -0. All right, it's kind of a lot for tangent, but it's all those shapes. All right, so when we sketch a graph of this tangent function, first off, we draw in the midline at 1. So there is our midline. I keep forgetting that on your guys's the graph is labeled. Here's pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. The tangent is this, all right? So we start on the midline, and then positive, but look at this. In this case, the positive, the amplitude is not 1 anymore. The amplitude tells you that I should be 2 off of the midline. So halfway between these guys, I need to go up 2. And then undefined. Undefined is a vertical asymptote. And I could have drawn this first because in tangent, the mid asymptotes are always going to be here and here. All right? And then it's negative. So 2 below the midline, on the midline, and 2 above the midline, 2 below the midline, on the midline. And then you could do the last one up there, but you don't have to. Pretend that went through the dot. And I always like to connect these backwards as well, right? So that it makes 3 full repetitions of it. And that's really all that there is. So practicing some of these, the midline here is at positive 3. Label up our graph. All right, now in this case, the amplitude is 1 because there's a 1 out in front. And for tangent, remember that it's 0, positive, undefined, negative 0, positive, undefined, negative 0. So I'm going to start this time by drawing in my asymptotes. If that helps you, please do so. I know the asymptotes will be there. 0 doesn't mean 0, it means on the midline. And then positive, so 1 above the midline because the amplitude is 1. Negative 0, positive, negative 0. And then just draw this guy in. To fill out that shape. For the last one that we're going to do together, I know there's one more that you should do on your own. The midline is at 0 because there is nothing after being added or subtracted. All right. So nothing being added or subtracted, so the midline is at 0. Personally, I like to draw my vertical asymptotes in now. That's a little bit easier for me than trying to figure out where they go as we come across them. And the amplitude is at 4. So 0, when I do positive, instead of just being 1 up, it's actually going to be 4 above the midline. Negative 0, positive, negative 0. You could do that last positive there to fill out the pattern. And then it is this, in this case, it doesn't really have that curve to it. But there is tangent, so finish up the last graphing problem on your own.